the 10 rings. More like the 10 hoops we had to jump through to avoid the problematic Mandarin character. Am I right? Okay, so the MCU has been going through a bit of a rough patch recently. Black Widow disappointed, it wasn't the movie it should have been, the Disney Plus shows have been spotty to say the least, and they don't have anything really huge or buzzworthy coming out in the near future. Jury's still out on the Eternals. So the pressure was really on Shang-Chi to pull Marvel Studios out of this little rut they've been in. And I'm not gonna say this film got them back to the unparalleled nerdgasm levels of Avengers Endgame or anything, but I do think it's a return to form, and after the summer we've just been through, that's not too shabby. What immediately jumped out at me about Shang-Chi was how different it felt from the rest of the MCU. It has the same tone to it like all the movies do, but it did seem like a departure from the typical stuff they put out, which I liked. The Marvel movies have a formula, the origin movies especially. They all kind of exist in the same space, they have similar themes and whatnot, and that's great when you're building a shared universe because it helps make everything fit together. But the downside is you do sacrifice a little originality to pull that off, and if you try to be more original and do something outside the box, you risk alienating fans who like being in that space. So if you want to branch out, I guess you have to be just different enough to be original, but not so different that it makes the fans think, what is this? This isn't like the other movies. This is new and scary. It makes me very uncomfortable. This is something they tried to shoot for recently, but missed the mark somewhat. Shang-Chi, to me, feels like it's just different enough to feel refreshing, while also still feeling like an MCU project, thus avoiding the issues that WandaVision had. WandaVision was definitely interesting, and I appreciated the risks they took, but it was so different that it felt like some weird, jarring experiment that it was tough to wrap your head around sometimes. But Shang-Chi hits that nail just right, where it does some different stuff that I haven't seen Marvel do before, while still feeling like a Marvel movie. The visuals feel different, the action scenes certainly feel different, and even some story elements too. The climax in particular was very unlike the other MCU films, in a good way. It does get a little too CG heavy for my taste, but you can say that about most movies like this. So there's been a lot of noise about how this is Marvel's first movie with an Asian superhero, their first movie with a predominantly Asian cast, Asian director, Asian writer. It's a lot like Black Panther was in that way. I actually liked it better than Black Panther. And you can definitely see that influence on display here. The fight scenes are influenced by so many different elements of Asian cinema and culture that they pay homage to. And I had fun trying to spot all the different nods they made to different movies and things like that. One sequence I thought, oh hell yeah, it's like a Jackie Chan fight. And then it looks like they're doing Bruce Lee, or there's a shot that's like a shot from Oldboy or something. And I'm sure there were a bunch of others I missed. But my favorite was the stuff they did to homage Asian fantasy films. Certain sequences feel very Crouching Tiger-esque, with the sweeping motions of the camera and the way characters move and leap around like they've got hollow bones or something. The scene where Shang-Chi's parents meet for the first time is like that, and wow, that scene is beautiful. I think my mouth fell open while I was watching this. It was just gorgeous to behold, especially after Black Widow, which didn't look bad exactly, but felt very drab by comparison. But here, everything is so lush and colorful, and with the choreography and the way it's shot, it's like action and dancing mixed with magic and superpowers. I don't even know if that makes sense, but the scene is stunning. And not all the fight scenes are shot that way, but they're all pretty great. If you're a fan of kung fu movies, imagine that, but with superpowers, magic, huge stunts, and a dude with a machete for an arm thrown in. It gets pretty crazy. And you can see that influence in the story, too. This is the first MCU movie, to me, that feels more like fantasy than sci-fi. There's ancient legends and dragons, a lost, hidden civilization, and mystical type things. This is a corner of the Marvel Universe that the movies haven't really explored that much. They got their feet wet with Doctor Strange, I guess, but now they're really going for it. And a lot of it feels very fresh, like they're finally going into new territory. So the story I liked a lot, visuals are great, big thumbs up on the fight scenes, which are aided by the fact that, unlike the fights in Snake Eyes, you can actually see them, and Simu Liu worked his ass off on those too. I don't know how much fight training he had prior to this movie, but he sells the hell out of it. He's very convincing with the physicality, gets an A+ in that department. Character-wise, though, I think he runs into some problems. I'm not sure if it was an issue with the writing, or maybe the source material just not being that deep. I don't know, I haven't read the comics. But Shang-Chi as a character, I didn't feel like there was a lot there. Even now, having seen the movie and thought about it for the last day or so, I couldn't really tell you who this guy is. I could tell you things that happened to him, but as far as who is Shang-Chi the person, it's all fairly superficial. If you look at other Marvel movies like Iron Man, Doctor Strange, Guardians of the Galaxy, you get a good sense very quickly of who these people are. Their wants and faults and quirks and stuff, they're very well defined. But with Shang-Chi, he doesn't seem to have a ton of personality. And again, I'm not sure whose fault that is. Simu Liu does great with the action. He doesn't have the magnetic presence of a Robert Downey Jr. or a Tom Holland, but he's certainly not bad. When he's called upon to be an actor, he does just fine. And overall, I think he makes a serviceable lead, but serviceable might not be enough. And I'm wondering if there was someone behind the scenes who wasn't totally confident that he could carry this thing alone, because the character is kind of underwritten. They don't give him a lot to really sink his teeth into, and outside of the action scenes, which again he does a terrific job with, it's almost as if they're afraid to let him have the spotlight by himself. He always seems to have scene partners, be it his friend Katie or his sister or his dad, or Katie, his sister, and his dad. It actually feels more like an ensemble or a buddy cop movie than a solo vehicle a lot of the time. And I'm not complaining about that exactly, because the cast is very good, and the scenes with Simu Liu and Awkwafina, who plays Katie, are easily the ones where he's the most engaging. That's when his charm and personality come out, and you can see the potential with this character. So I'm not sure what the trick is, but for whatever reason, he seems to need the little push that she gives him that he doesn't have when she's not there. And don't undercut how much of a difference that makes. The chemistry between Awkwafina and Simu Liu just jumps off the screen. It's obvious they were having a blast working together, because you totally buy that these two characters have been BFFs for 10 years. But then once they dial Awkwafina back slightly in Acts 2 and 3, believe it or not, Shang-Chi kind of disappears into the movie for a little bit. So yeah, in a weird way, Awkwafina is the unlikely linchpin of this whole thing. Awkwafina, who completely steals the first act of the movie, by the way. She's the funniest character, she stands out from everybody, she gets all the best lines. If they get a sequel, expect her to be very quickly promoted from best friend supporting character to co-lead, and it'll be well fucking deserved. In the next one, I'm sure she'll get a mystical weapon of her own, and then they'll be fighting side by side as equals or something. Even the mid-credit stinger seems to point to these two being more of a duo than a Shang-Chi solo act going forward. And to be honest, that's probably the right way to go. I got a real kick out of them as a duo. Their friendship is one of the best things in the movie. It just feels like a dynamic the movie stumbled onto by happenstance because it was unable or unwilling to make the lead guy viable enough to carry the load on his own. Good for Awkwafina, I guess, but not so good for Simu Liu, who spends the first third of the film being overshadowed by his sidekick, and the rest of it being kinda swallowed up by the story itself. And it is a good story, but I think the filmmakers were a little too focused on that and needed to be a little more focused on their lead character, who, if they'd put more meat on the bone here, might not have had this problem. But like the saying goes, a hero's only as good as the villain who opposes him. And that's very true in this case, because I think the villain, Shang-Chi's father, has to take some of the responsibility for this too. Not through any fault of his own, really. Tony Leung does great with the role, as does the rest of the supporting cast, but I think it's another case of the writing not totally doing what it needed to do. The movie begins with this backstory about how Shang-Chi's father was an ancient warlord who founded this huge criminal organization and then sent really dangerous people after Shang-Chi and blah blah blah. And after the 10 rings have been teased forever, you'd think this dude would be really imposing, really threatening. And yet once we meet him, and throughout most of the movie quite frankly, he doesn't really seem like that bad of a guy. Sure, there are reasons for that. He's the closest thing to a big bad the film has, and he does do bad things, but they're not framed as him being a despicable person like Obadiah Stane in Iron Man, for example. He's motivated by tragedy, and even with the worst thing he does in the movie, I still couldn't really bring myself to hate him that much. It's like the movie was afraid to pull the trigger on him going super dark, presumably because while he is a straight male, he's not a straight white male. So no matter what he does, we've got to make sure he's sympathetic at all time. Because. And I'm not even saying they do a bad job with that, they don't. I like the character, and the emotional pathos with him are effective, but because they don't go all the way villainous with him, I can't really qualify him as the shark in the water. And considering the issue with Shang-Chi not necessarily being the most captivating character on his own, I think he needed a more forceful antagonist to really push him to the limit. It might sound cliche, but sometimes to really bring out the best in your hero, you need your bad guy to be a bad guy. And that's just not the way they went with him. Now, I do think there's a lot to be said for the family tragedy angle, but to really get the most bang for your buck out of that, they needed to focus more on the characters, whereas they chose to focus on the story. It still works, don't get me wrong. I just think they left some money on the table by not taking the other route. I don't think Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is as amazing as some people are saying. I do think there's a lot of great stuff here. It's just hindered slightly because the two characters who should have been the linchpins, Shang-Chi and his father, don't really get the attention they need to be what the movie needs them to be. And as a result, they don't push the narrative as much as you'd want them to. They don't drive the story drives them, basically. And that doesn't have to hurt your movie as long as the story's good, but it does mean that your most important characters don't make as deep of an impression as others have in other MCU movies. Having said all that, there's nothing in this movie I'd call bad. Far from it. I had a lot of fun with this. I just wanted to get to know Shang-Chi the character as well as Shang-Chi the action star / superhero, and I don't feel like I did. That aside though, there's so much cool shit going on in this film. The fight scenes are awesome, the visuals are fun at times, beautiful at others. A good 90% of the humor lands really well. I dug all the nods to Asian cinema. The story is something pretty original for the MCU. Overall, this movie's pretty damn good. Shang-Chi may have one or two issues I hope they can iron out in the next movie, but it's miles better than Black Widow. And I think it's one of the most fun origin movies Marvel's done in a while. I'm glad I saw it in a theater too. I know some people are reluctant to go back to the theater right now, but this one's worth it. The MCU definitely stumbled through the summer, but they righted course and stuck the landing at the very end. Now if they can just get that trend to continue, they'll be in good shape. I'm looking at you, Eternals. Thanks everyone for watching. Sorry if there were any audio problems with this video. Brand new microphone, still working the kinks out. But let me know what you thought about Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings in the comments. Ding the bell icon and follow my social media so you'll always be notified when I upload new stuff. I also have a live streaming channel now, the links are down there. And most importantly, don't forget to thumbs up the video, share, subscribe, and make sure you're still subscribed, because what really deserves to have his life thrown into chaos when his insane father sends a jacked up mercenary with a machete for an arm to attack him when he least expects it is the YouTube algorithm. That's all for now, but I'll be back with more soon, so stay tuned for that, do all the YouTube things, and I'll see you next time.